Hey everybody, Mrs. Dumas here, and today we are starting Unit 8, which is titled The Cold War and Decolonization. And as the name suggests, the Cold War is a huge component of this unit, so that's what we're going to start with today. So let's get going. So today's learning objectives are pretty basic. You definitely have to be able to define the Cold War, know what the goal was of the United States and Soviet Union during the Cold War. What were two ways that the United States tried to prevent the spread of communism, but what were two ways also that the Soviet Union tried to spread communism? And then finally, what are proxy wars and why did the US and Soviet Union choose to engage in these types of war instead of directly fighting each other? So take a second here, write down those learning objectives, and when you're done, get back to the video. So, the Cold War is the tension and rivalry that we're going to see from the United States and the Soviet Union between 1945 and 1990. So, it's a 45-year, quote, war. And even though it never turned into an actual physical war directly between the United States and the Soviet Union, these two nations will use other countries and other regions across the globe to help either stop the spread of communism or help the spread of it. So really, this is like an ideological war, and it's the United States and democracy and capitalism versus the Soviet Union and totalitarianism and communism. And the goal for each side is to win this Cold War. And for the United States, that would mean the whole world is democratic and capitalist. And for the Soviet Union, that would mean the whole world is communist. And they're going to fight the war, this Cold War, in a variety of ways. So, just a little historical context. At the end of World War II, the United States and the Soviet Union are the two remaining strong powers. Western Europe has been devastated by World War II. China is a cluster, which we'll find out later this week why. Japan is down for the count. India's got some issues. Africa's got some issues. So does Latin America. Like, these are the two superpowers. And like we said, the United States is a capitalist society with a democracy. The Soviet Union is a communist country with a dictatorship. And again, both want to be the most powerful nation in the world. So the Cold War goals for the United States are pretty simple, right? They want to promote open markets for US goods, and they don't want another depression, right? They're not worried about European wars right now. That's not their goal. Their goal is, hey, we never want to go through what we did with the Great Depression again. We need more markets to be able to sell more goods. And in order for that to happen, they had to promote democracy throughout. At least this is what the United States thought. Because if you can promote democracy, that will probably lead to capitalism. And if you've got capitalism, especially in Asia, because they're huge markets, then people are going to want to buy and sell goods from their country and from others. The second goal is to stop that spread of communism. That is a huge issue with the United States. The United States equates communism with Stalin, totalitarianism, dictatorship. They had just fought a world war to prevent that with Hitler. They want to prevent that with Stalin and the Soviet Union as well. Because what the United States believes is this. It's called the domino effect. And if one nation falls to communism, others will follow. So like a chain of events. So think of the Soviet Union as that first domino, and then it hits a second domino, which will be China, and then China falls, and then according to the United States, everyone will fall after that. So it's really, really, really important not to let communism spread at all to avoid the domino effect. So again, the two major goals for the United States during the Cold War is to promote open markets for US goods, and number two, to stop the spread of communism. The Cold War goals for the USSR, the Soviet Union, are a little bit different. And the first one they want to do is create greater security. They're a little tired of getting invaded. They were invaded in World War I. They've had many invasions between the wars. They were invaded in World War II by Hitler. They're done with it. They're done with the invasions. So they want a way to be able to stop the invasions. And their policy is, we'll talk about it, to create a Soviet bloc. And to create this, that means they're going to have what we call defensible borders. And they want countries who are really near them to be communist, to be friendly to the communist movement that the Soviet Union started. And then their second goal is to spread communism around the world. So, number one, protect the Soviet Union by creating what's known as the Eastern Bloc, which you can see on the map on the right-hand side. Create nations who are friendly to the Soviet Union, who aren't going to invade them, and that creates kind of a buffer zone for the Soviet Union. And then number two, spread communism around the world. And so, to accomplish these goals, here are some strategies that both nations use during the Cold War. For the United States, they're going to try to contain communism, which means not letting it spread. Both nations will use espionage or spying. They both will offer foreign aid to turn nations to their side. They also both will use propaganda and proxy wars. So the big things we're talking about, the commonalities when it comes to fighting this Cold War, is that the Soviet Union and the United States will use spies and espionage. They are going to bribe nations with foreign aid. They are going to use propaganda, and they are going to use proxy wars. And so these are the major strategies, the major policies they're going to use to fight this Cold War. So let's first talk about the United States, because they're obviously a major player. So one of the first things that happened after World War II is takes place in Greece and Turkey, and I'm going to explain what goes on. So basically, Turkish and Greek governments are fighting communist guerrillas in their country. So these people who may have been held down by Turkish and Greek governments during the war and prior to it, they're like, no, we're the working class. We don't want to be held down anymore. We want communism. Okay, so you have these rebel groups fighting the established governments in power in Turkey and Greece. And the Soviets want these two nations to become communists. The Americans are like, oh, hell no, right? Think that domino theory. If one falls, the rest will follow. And so there is not a snowball's chance that the United States is going to allow Turkey or Greece to become communist. And for a little bit of time, Britain was helping Turkish and Greek governments fight these communists, but the British eventually say, dude, we're broke. After World War II, we're broke. We can't help anymore. So the United States steps in. These nations appeal to the U.S. going, please help us, please help us. And the United States says, yes, we will help you. We will help you and give you aid, and more importantly, prevent you from turning communists. And this is known as the Truman Doctrine. And starting with the Truman Doctrine, the United States makes a guarantee, a promise to nations, that if you are trying to fight communism, no matter what nation you are, where you are, we will help you fight. So with Greece and Turkey, this comes in the form of $400 million of aid. That is military aid and civilian aid. So they're going to give aid in terms of weapons and military and help fighting, and that will help fight the guerrillas. But then they're also going to give civilian aid in terms of loans, food, clothing, whatever else they need, because the United States believes if people are relatively well off and things are going well, they would never turn to communism, like ever. That people only turn to communism when things are going really bad and they have no other options. So the United States is like, hey, we'll provide you the aid, we'll make life better, therefore you will never turn to a communist group. And this is what they do in 1947 with the Truman Doctrine, and it works. It's really, really successful. Greece and Turkey basically are able to fight down those communist guerrillas. The communist threat goes away, and these nations become democratic. So this was the first attempt at containment, right? They're stopping the spread of communism, and the Truman Doctrine is truly, truly successful. Now, another way that the Americans are going to fight is through the Marshall Plan, and this is really important as well. The Marshall Plan is mainly going to apply to Western European nations. It does begin in 1947, and it's an economic aid plan for Europe to help them recover from World War II, because Western Europe is devastated. There are bombing campaigns. Germany is falling apart. England has been really harassed. France has got so much damage. Like almost all Western European nations have a ton of damage caused by World War II. Their factories are down. Their infrastructure is terrible. Like, it's all been destroyed. So George Marshall, who was the Secretary of State of the United States, proposes this plan and basically says, we're going to give you money. You don't even have to pay it back. Right? We are going to give you money in the form of grants, and we want you to use that money to rebuild your infrastructure, your transportation, your factories, your homes, your buildings. We just want you to recover. And again, people don't have to pay this money back if they take it. Who wouldn't want this? This is amazing for the United States. And you might be thinking, well, that's a stupid idea. That's a lot of money you're giving out, and that's going to put you in debt. But it actually doesn't, because by helping Europe recover economically, those Europeans are going to have to buy stuff to rebuild. And guess where they're going to have to buy it from? The United States. So that's going to help the U.S. economy. Not only that, the more that Western Europe builds up their economy, the more we can buy from Western Europe later on. The second goal is that Marshall and President Truman understood that a prosperous Europe would be better able to resist communism. Because again, the United States thought process was this: people only turn to communism when things are really, really, really bad, when they have no money, no food, no job. Think about it. That's what started the Russian Revolution. If we can make it so people have food, clothing, money, jobs, they won't turn to communism. So again, this is another way to contain communism and prevent its spread. And the Marshall Plan was even more successful than the Truman Doctrine. It really worked. But the United States was under no illusion that that was going to be enough, right? That was going to be enough to stop the spread of communism. They also knew that there probably was going to have to be some military component. And this is what leads to the creation of NATO, which is a North Atlantic Treaty Organization. This is a military alliance, and this is the first military alliance the United States enters into since like 1776. Like, it is, because normally we don't sign alliances with anybody, but this is how much we wanted to stop the spread of communism. And the motto of NATO was, an attack on one is an attack on all. So any nations that joined NATO, if they were attacked, every member nation of NATO would go and help them, right? Militarily, especially. And so what ends up happening is that we see a bunch of nations join NATO: the US, Belgium, Britain, Canada, Denmark, France. What you can't see is most of these nations are in Western Europe. Most of these nations are up here in this map right here. And the goal is, if any of those nations are attacked by someone else, communist or not, everybody would come to the aid of that nation. Okay, it's called deterrence. They're trying to deter people from invading foreign countries. Because if I'm like, I don't know, who would I be? Let's say I am Sweden. Sweden's always neutral, so that's not how it goes. But if I'm Sweden and I want to attack Denmark, I'm going to think twice, because if I attack Denmark, I'm then going to have the United States, Belgium, Britain, Canada, Denmark, France, Iceland, Italy, Luxembourg, all of them coming after me. So I am probably not going to invade Denmark, because, well, I think I could take down Denmark on my own. There is no way that I can be successful against all the other members of NATO. And so this was a way for Western European democratic nations and the United States and Canada to try to prevent what they had seen from Hitler, what they'd seen from Stalin. Like, no more invasions, people. We're done. And this will also halt the spread of communism. Well, the Soviet Union sees all this, and they're not just going to sit back and go, okay, whatever, that's what you feel like you need to do. They're going to fight back as well. And so the first thing they do, and we've already talked about this briefly, is they create what's known as satellite states. And these are technically countries that are independent, but they are under heavy control or influence from another country. So that main country is going to be the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union is going to have a ton of influence, a lot of control, economically, politically, and militarily, over these nations in pink, and then also like the salmon color. So even though technically Poland is independent, the Czechoslovakia is independent, Hungary is independent, in reality, the Soviet Union has installed communist governments in each of these nations. So the Soviet Union basically has political control over these nations. They also have economic control over these nations, and they will use the military to keep these nations under control. So these satellite states are that buffer zone that Stalin wanted to create it so the Soviet Union isn't invaded anymore. And even though he had told the United States and Britain and everything, hey, these nations are independent, they're going to have free elections, they're basically controlled on their own, that is not really true. They just basically became the Soviet Union Part 2, and Stalin and then eventually Khrushchev, whoever the Russian leaders are almost in complete control of these nations, which is not so cool, let's really be honest. And then another response, and this was to NATO, was the Warsaw Pact. So this is going to be an organization of communist states in Central and Eastern Europe who are going to agree to a military alliance. This was done in 1955, and it's the Soviet version of NATO, and the members were Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Poland, Romania, and the USSR. So definitely a heck of a lot smaller than what we see with NATO. And most of these nations are the ones that the Soviet Union has a lot of influence with, but at least in the Soviet Union's eyes, they do have agreements and will have access to more troops and more weapons as a result of the Warsaw Pact. So this is their military pact to keep them safe. East Germany will also join it in 1956, but a little bit about East Germany later on. So what I want you to do now is I want you to pause this video. I want you to get up. I want you to take a break, do what you need to do, and then come back and we will continue on with, now that we know what the Soviets and United States want and how they're going to fight it, whether or not they're successful. Why don't you go ahead and take a 2 or 3 minute break. Welcome back, everyone. So we've talked about what the Soviet Union wants, what the United States want, how they're going to fight it, some strategies they've already used. Now we got to get into the nitty-gritty of it and see who is successful. Another aspect that we are going to see, and this is what really escalates the Cold War, is the nuclear arms race. This is another strategy that both nations will use to try to either prevent the spread of communism or stop the spread of or promote the spread of communism. So remember, the last nuclear weapon that we actually had was the atomic bomb that dropped on Hiroshima and then on Nagasaki, which were completely devastating to Japan. But even though the United States is the first nation to drop an atomic weapon, the Soviet Union is going to quickly catch up. And as the tensions increase between the United States and the Soviet Union actually starts exploding its first atomic bomb in 1949. And so this was the Soviets basically, taunt the United States, hey, US, you have one, so do we. And then the United States is like, oh yeah? Well, guess what? We made a hydrogen bomb and we've exploded it, and it's 1,000 times more powerful than the Hiroshima atomic bomb. And the Soviet Union's like, what? We have to get one of those too. So what the Soviet Union and the United States did is they continually built, I hate to say the word improved because it's a nuclear weapon, but improved and smaller and more powerful nuclear weapons. Right? And these were supposed to frighten the other side, which they did frighten the other side. The fear of nuclear war was something that was huge from 1950 until 1990. I remember being in high school worrying about atomic weapons. I remember practicing atomic weapon drills or nuclear weapon drills where you'd have this siren go off and we had to hide under the desk. Not quite sure what a desk would do in the face of a nuclear bomb drop, but hey, at least they tried. So this was a really, really big deal during the Cold War, the nuclear arms race. And it escalated and escalated and escalated. And people were on both sides, the Soviet Union and the United States, were constantly in fear of the other side dropping a bomb. But eventually, they realized, the leaders seriously realized that, hey, this is a bad idea. If we drop a nuclear weapon on the Soviet Union, they're going to drop one on us, and then we're going to drop one on them, and we're going to destroy the entire world. It's called mutually assured destruction. So early on, like Khrushchev and Kennedy and Truman and Eisenhower, they're like, we really should not be launching these weapons ever, because no one will win. Now, they keep building them, to threaten the other side, But the goal was, we can't do this. We cannot drop these weapons. It will destroy the world. So if they're not going to use nuclear weapons, there's got to be another way that they can fight the war. And they don't want to fight it directly between themselves, because if they do, that will lead to that nuclear weapon dropping, and that's going to destroy the world. So they're going to use others to basically fight for them. And this is what's known as a proxy war. So it's kind of like letting stand-ins to fight. Like it would be if Mr. Breen and I wanted to fight each other, but instead of us fighting each other, I used Miss Trujillo or Miss Benarowitz, and Mr. Breen used Mrs. Story. So we don't fight each other directly. We have others fight for us. So a proxy war is a war that's instigated either by the United States or the Soviet Union, but neither the Soviet Union nor the United States will get directly involved. They fight by using other people's governments, and they use rebels in foreign countries. So as you can see, there were a lot of proxy wars going on during the Cold War. All those little yellow areas, those are proxy wars. Let's give you a couple of more specific examples. Some of the major proxy wars during the time were the Korean War, the Vietnam War, which we know you've heard of, the Cuban Revolution. There's also a war in Nicaragua, and then Afghanistan, which was an epic level disaster for the Soviet Union, but that's later on. So what I want you to do right now is pause the video and then go back to the Schoology folder and click on one of the proxy war links. Only one. So if you want Korea, great. If you want to read about Vietnam, great. If you want to read about Afghanistan, great. Cuba, Nicaragua, it doesn't matter. Just pick one of them and do a little reading, a little viewing, and see how the United States and the Soviet Union fought during those wars. What did they do? How did they instigate the war and then try to make their side win? So this is going to take a few minutes. So pause this video, go do your proxy wars, and then come on back. So hopefully now you have a better understanding of what a proxy war is and what the proxy war looks like in the region that you researched. And again, this was super, super common during the Cold War. United States and Soviet Union got involved a lot in the proxy wars. And the whole idea was, if your side won the proxy war, then that would be, for the United States, that's a victory for, democracy. Or if the Soviet Union side won, that's a victory for communism. So they used other nations, the United States used other nations to stop the spread of communism, while the Soviet Union used other nations to spread communism. And in all honesty, these aren't really good wars for those countries involved. It kind of screws them over in a big, big, big way. And we're starting to see the results of that late in the 20th century and into the 21st century. So in the end, the Cold War is a 50-year war between the United States and the Soviet Union, and each side was trying to win. The Soviet Union was trying to win by spread communism. The United States was trying to win by stopping the spread of communism. And they're going to use alliances, they're going to use the arms race, the space race, financial aid, and proxy wars to fight this war, because they never directly fight each other. And the reason they don't fight each other is because they know if they do, it will end in mutually assured destruction, not only of those two nations, but of likely the world. Now, the Cold War will end in 1991, but this is one war that will truly define history for the 20th century. Thanks, as always, for listening. If you have any questions, concerns, or comments, you know that you can hit us up in email or remind.com. And until next time, see you later.